Welcome back to the Davening experience. Davening has an inherent contradiction. The words for davening the Chazal use for the mitzvah is that it's avoda shebelev. Avoda means service, and lev means of the heart. Service means like a slave. Everything's defined. Everything's almost forced. Everything's imposed. But the lev means that it's supposed to be with emotion. So you see already in the language used for tefillah that there's an inherent contradiction. And that's the way it works in halacha, that on the one hand, our behaviors seem to be legislated. Even the way a person's supposed to hold one's hands in davening, there's a way to hold one's hands and how to stand and when to bow. Everything's very much restricted, legislated, just so. But the heart is supposed to be free to be able to reach out emotionally to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So there's this dichotomy that we always have in our davening. So how exactly does shuckling fit into that? Shuckling means that a lot of times when people daven, their bodies are moving. Is that also legislated? Is that something a person is supposed to do? Is it something a person is not supposed to do? Sometimes people look really strange. Is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea? So I want to read to you what it says in Shulchan Aruch. In Shulchan Aruch it says, Nagu hamedaktikim lehisnoi ea b'shah shekarin v'Torah, that those who are medaktikim, the word dikduk means grammar because everything's very precise. So people who are very precise in what they do, they move around, they shuckle. At the time that they read from the Torah, Dugmas HaTorah shenitna beresas, just like the Torah was given on Har Sinai, it was terrifying. It was with trembling. People were shaking. So learning Torah, what person shuckles is supposed to be trembling. It's the experience of Har Sinai, an experience of trembling. And similarly, but not so similarly, when a person's davening, it's also shuckling, but it's a different experience. Al Shem Kalatzmosai Tomarna Hashem Michamoicha, because it's supposed to be in davening, getting a person's entire body into davening, as if one's entire bones are screaming out at Kadosh Baruch Hu, who is like you. So it's a very fascinating thing that a person can be shuckling at two different times when one's learning Torah and when one is davening, and it's a completely different experience. During davening, says the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch, it's an experience of tefillah, of praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to during learning Torah, it's an experience of trembling, of approaching Har Sinai. So a couple of things. Number one, it's not nervous energy. At least it's not supposed to be nervous energy. That shuckling is something the medaktikim do. It's something that's done by a person who's being careful and precise with his behaviors. Real shuckling is a conscious aspect of avodas Hashem. It's not merely nervous energy being expressed. And secondly, there are two types of shuckling. There's an experience of trembling, an experience of a person's entire body is screaming out, I want to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, full disclosure, there were poskim who said one should not shuckle, at least, or particularly, during Shemona Esrei. So Zimra, Shema, the brachas of Shema, if a person wants to shuckle, so no problem. But during Shemona Esrei, this was a discussion amongst the poskim. Is it a good idea or is it a bad idea? So the Magen Avram, for example, when he talks about it, so he starts off by quoting poskim that say one should not be moving around during Shemona Esrei. However, he goes on to say that there were others that would move around, that would shake a little bit in a gentle way during the brachas at the end of every bracha in Shemona Esrei, right? Specifically when they said the name of Hashem, because there's a pasuk that says, Mipnei Shemi Nichesu, that a person would, says the Navi, that a person should be in awe of Hashem's name. So there was a certain trembling. Back to not what the Ramah is saying. The Ramah is saying there's a trembling by Torah and a praising Hashem by davening. The Magen Avraham suggests it may be trembling also if one shuckles only at the end of a bracha when one says Hashem's name. There are other approaches that a person simply sways back and forth a little bit, and there's even reasons al pi Kabbalah that it's a different experience entirely. It's the experience of one's neshama, the neshama being referred to as a flame, that the person moving back and forth in different ways is like the flickering of a flame as he's in touch with his neshama, praising and reaching out to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So at the end of the day, the Mishnah Brura, when he talks about this, he says, listen, There are those who suggest one should not shuckle during Shemona Esrei, those who suggest one should in different ways, different experiences. And then Mishnah Berurah says at the end of the day, one should do whatever would enable him to have the most kavana. So I want to conclude with this. It's interesting, by the way, Rav Moshe Feinstein, I heard that he stood straight at attention whenever he would daven Shemona Esrei, because apparently he had had that experience in his lifetime where he was called in front of a king or some authority figure, and they told him, don't move a muscle. And he had to stay at attention the entire time. And I heard that he used to daven like that to get in touch with that experience as he's been standing in front of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. If that's how you're supposed to stand in front of a human king, much more so in front of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Be that as it may, Mishnah Berurah says you should do whatever brings you the most kavana. So two things. Number one, to shuckle or not to shuckle? So the answer is it depends on what's going to enable you to have the best kavana that you can have. But it's interesting, it's not supposed to be a nervous energy. It's supposed to be a conscious act of swaying, of trembling, of calling out with every part of your body and not just your mind and your lips, that all of my bones cry out to Kadosh Baruch Hu, who is like you. So those are the two things to keep in mind. That number one, that it should be conscious and not just nervous energy. And number two, that you have to know each day. We shouldn't necessarily come up with what they call a shita. I shuckle, I don't shuckle. We should be flexible. We should realize that every day is different. Every day comes with its challenges of kavana, and whatever works for that day to focus that day, that's what we should tap into.